Imagine you are looking through humanity's deepest telescope, and suddenly you see something that physically cannot exist. A star that does not simply dim billions of kilometers away, but trillions of light years distant, dims wrong. It flickers, not like a pulsar, not like a Cepheid variable, not like an eclipsing binary. It vanishes by 90% of its brightness in mere days, then returns, then sinks into darkness again, with no trace of dust, no companion, no explosion. It simply switches off. Then, years later, another identical star in another galaxy does the same. And another, and another. Right now, there are already more than 2,000 of them, and not a single classical explanation holds.
What if everything we thought we knew about stars, about light, about the very fabric of space-time, is wrong? What if these stars are not dying, but something, or someone, is covering them? And doing it with a precision that freezes the blood, as if a gigantic cosmic switch is being flipped according to a schedule we are only beginning to decipher. Today we will embark on a journey through evidence that challenges everything. Brace yourselves. We begin. We are used to thinking of stars as eternal beacons. They are born, they live, they die, but their light reaches us even billions of years after their death. That is the foundation. That is the bedrock of all observational astronomy. And then, in the 21st century, something begins to happen that shatters this picture. In the year 2015, a graduate student from Pennsylvania State University named Tabitha Boyajian publishes a paper that detonates the scientific world. She had been analyzing data from the Kepler Space Telescope, which for 4 years stared at 150,000 stars, hunting exoplanets by the transit method when a planet crosses in front of its star and slightly dims its light. And among all that perfect noise, Boyajian finds a star cataloged as KIC 8462852. Later it will simply be called Tabby Star. The light from this star did not drop by fractions of a percent, as it would for a passing planet. It plunged by 22% at once, then another 15%, then 2%, then 20% again. The shape of the dimming curve was asymmetric, chaotic, utterly unlike any known planet or dust disk. It looked as though something enormous, irregular in shape, and composed of thousands of separate objects was drifting in front of the star. At first, people thought, maybe a swarm of comets? But to block 22% of the light from an F-class star, slightly larger than the Sun, you would need a comet swarm the size of an entire star system. And it would have had to appear out of nowhere, even though the star had been observed for decades with nothing unusual. Then, maybe an inner dust disk. But the dust temperature would have to be 600 to 700 Kelvin, and the infrared excess we see around young stars with disks was almost zero. Dust must glow in the infrared. This dust did not glow. Then, maybe the star is eating itself? But the spectra remained perfectly normal. No signs of catastrophe. And then, for the first time in the history of modern astronomy, serious scientists in a peer-reviewed paper used a word that had previously been taboo: alien megastructure. Specifically, a partially constructed Dyson sphere, or Dyson swarm. The world exploded. The media screamed, "Aliens found!" The scientific community blushed and tried to silence the topic. But the data remained the data. And here is what is most terrifying. After Tabby Star, they began finding others.
In 2019, the ASSN project discovered the star VVV-WIT-07, which plunged into darkness by 97%, nearly vanished completely, then returned, then vanished again. In 2021 came Gaia 17 BPP, dimming by 80%. In 2023, a new study used machine learning to sift through the entire Zwicky Transient Facility archive and uncovered another 20 similar objects. By 2025, there are already more than 2,000, and the statistics scream, this cannot be coincidence. But the most disturbing phase began in 2024. Astronomers from the European Southern Observatory and the James Webb Space Telescope team started long-term infrared monitoring of several of these stars, and they discovered something no one expected. When the star dims in visible light, in the infrared, it does not merely continue shining, it shines brighter, as if something is absorbing the visible light and re-emitting it in the infrared with almost 100% efficiency. This is physically impossible for natural objects. Dust cannot do that. Gas cannot do that. Planets cannot do that.
The only thing that can convert energy with such near-perfect efficiency is engineered material with almost perfect absorption and re-emission properties, the kind we ourselves are trying to invent for next-generation solar panels. And that is when science quietly began to lose its mind. Because if these are megastructures, they are not merely sitting there. They are being built right now, at terrifying speed. Tabby stars showed perfectly stable brightness for 120 years of photographic records, from the year 1890 to 2010. Then, in just 4 years of Kepler observations, it lost 22%. That means construction began, literally, within our own lifetime. In cosmic terms, that is as if someone erected the Great Pyramid in a single night. Now imagine the scale. To block 22% of the light from a star 1.5 million kilometers across, you need structures covering hundreds of millions of square kilometers, thousands of Earth-sized surfaces. And that is only what we see today. In 50 years, that star could disappear completely. And there are already thousands of such stars. We are watching entire civilizations, millions of years ahead of us, begin the dismantling of their stellar systems right now. And the most horrifying part is that these are not isolated cases. This is statistics. This is a trend. This is a wave. Astronomers no longer hesitate to say it. We are witnessing a phase transition of the universe, from the age of stars to the age of megastructures.
And we are the only known civilization that has not yet begun. But the accumulated data push us toward an even darker thought. We may not simply be late. We may be inside a nature preserve. Look up at the night sky for a moment. Every single star you can see with the naked eye is still in its natural state. Every one of them is still burning freely, naked hydrogen, pouring raw light into the void exactly as nature intended. That sky is a relic, a photograph of a universe that, somewhere far beyond our little corner, has already ended. Because out there, beyond a few 100 million light years, the stars are going dark in patterns that cannot be explained by supernovae, by mergers, by anything that happens to a star on its own. They are being harvested. In the year 2024, a quiet consortium was formed, the Dyson Anomaly Working Group. Officially, it does not exist. Unofficially, it includes senior astronomers from the James Webb Space Telescope, the Vera C. Rubin Observatory, the Square Kilometer Array precursor sites, and 3 intelligence agencies that will never be named. Their charter is simple and terrifying. Catalog every star that has begun unnatural dimming since photographic records began, and determine whether the phenomenon is spreading toward the Milky Way. By the spring of 2025, they had processed more than 15 billion light curves. The result was a map that no one wanted to publish. Across the entire observable universe, roughly 1 star in every 30,000 has already entered the dimming sequence.
That is more than 200 million stars whose light is being systematically blocked, converted, and redirected. 200 million ongoing construction sites, each one the size of a solar system. And the distribution is not random. It follows the large-scale structure of the cosmic web. Where filaments of galaxies are densest, the fraction of affected stars climbs to 1 in 8,000. Where voids are emptiest, the phenomenon is almost absent. Whatever's doing this prefers crowded neighborhoods. It is efficient, it is patient, and it is accelerating. The most chilling discovery came from a reanalysis of the original Kepler field, the same patch of sky that gave us Tabby star. When the full 20-year data set, including K2 and TESS follow-ups, was stacked together, astronomers found something hiding in the noise, a secular trend. Across the entire field of roughly 200,000 stars, the combined brightness of all stars combined has fallen by 0.4% since the year 2009. 0.4% sounds tiny. Across 200,000 suns, it is the energy output of 20,000 yellow dwarfs simply gone, redirected, swallowed. No natural process can do that without leaving a blazing infrared signature. There is no excess heat. The energy is not being wasted, it is being used. This is when the phrase post-biological heat engines entered the internal memos. Because whatever's building these structures has already solved the waste heat problem that limits our own civilization. They are not leaking energy into the cold of space. They are capturing it with efficiencies we associate with room temperature superconductors and metamaterials that have not been invented yet. They are running their civilization on the waste light of stars, and they are doing it so cleanly that the only way we notice is when the stars themselves start to disappear. And then came the objects that broke every remaining natural explanation. In late 2024, the Rubin Observatory's first deep survey image captured a star in the constellation of Sculptor that dimmed by 63% in exactly 41 days, then brightened again by 63% in another 41 days, then repeated the cycle with almost perfect symmetry. The light curve looked less like astronomy and more like a machine heartbeat. The period is stable to within milliseconds over multiple cycles. Nothing in nature produces symmetry that precise outside of atomic clocks. When the spectrum was taken during the dim phase, astronomers expected to see absorption lines from dust or gas. Instead, they saw the clean, smooth signature of a nearly perfect blackbody at exactly 297 Kelvin, 24 degrees Celsius, the temperature of a warm summer day on Earth. Something the size of a solar system was maintaining surface temperatures comfortable for liquid water and human skin. That is not a coincidence. That is a choice. Within weeks, 5 more stars were found exhibiting the same 41-day perfect square wave dimming, all of them at the same temperature, all of them in galaxies between 800 million and 1,200,000,000 light-years away, all of them aligned along the same filament of the cosmic web. As if someone or something had switched on 6 identical stellar-scale devices along the same power line. And then the James Webb Space Telescope turned its infrared eyes to one of them during the bright phase. What it saw was not a star, it was a grid, a hexagonal lattice of emitting facets, each one exactly 1 astronomical unit across, stretching across the entire face of the star and beyond. The facets were not glowing because they were hot. They were glowing because they were pumping waste heat into the infrared at precisely controlled wavelengths. The geometry was perfect to within the resolution limit of the telescope, 1 part in 100,000. That is not construction. That is manufacturing, mass production, standardization. We are not looking at one alien civilization. We are looking at an industrial process that has already reached galactic scales and is still expanding. And the most frightening slide in the secret presentations is the one that shows the growth curve. If you plot the number of affected stars against look-back time, the curve is exponential with a doubling time of roughly 11 years. 11 years to double the number of harvested stars. That is faster than humanity has ever grown any technology in our history. At that rate, within 2 centuries, every star we can currently see will be encased, dismantled, or converted. Within 5 centuries, the entire observable universe will go dark in visible light. But this is only the small fragment of a far stranger picture.
There is a moment in every scientific revolution when the old guard stops laughing and starts sweating. We passed that moment sometime in the northern spring of 2025. In March of that year, the European Space Agency quietly declassified 37 minutes of archival Gaia data that had been flagged anomalous and locked away since 2018. Gaia measures positions, distances, and motions of more than 2 billion stars with micro-arc-second precision. It is the most accurate map of the Milky Way ever made. And deep inside that map, hidden under layers of automatic rejection filters, were 21,000 stars whose proper motion, the slow drift across the sky, did not match their measured parallax distance. In simple terms, these stars were pretending to be closer or farther away than physics allowed. The only way this is possible is if something massive and invisible was bending the light path between the star and us, exactly like a gravitational lens, but without any visible foreground galaxy or cluster to cause the lensing. 21,000 invisible gravitational lenses, each one strong enough to shift a background star by tens of micro-arcseconds, scattered throughout our own galaxy and the local group. When the Dyson Anomaly Working Group fed these positions into their master catalog, every single one of the 21,000 lined up perfectly with a star that had either already begun unnatural dimming or was scheduled to begin dimming within the next 15 years according to the 11-year exponential curve. The lenses were not random. They were scaffolding. Imagine you want to wrap an entire star in a rigid shell or swarm. The moment you block even 1% of its light, the radiation pressure drops on that side. The star begins to feel an unbalanced push. Over centuries, it would drift, or worse, the shell would have to fight stellar wind with rockets. Expensive.
Wasteful. Civilizations that can build Dyson-class structures do not tolerate waste. So instead, long before the first panel is launched, they place ultra-compact gravitic anchors in a spherical lattice at roughly 100 to 300 astronomical units from the star. Each anchor is probably no larger than a small planet, but dense enough, perhaps stabilized exotic matter or micro-black holes, to produce a focused gravitational gradient. The anchors lock the star in place against its own radiation pressure long before the swarm arrives. The star never suspects it has been caged until the lights go out. We cannot see the anchors directly, they are dark. But Gaia can see the tiny mirage they create in the light of background stars. And for 7 years, the automated pipelines had been throwing those mirages away as noise. Now we know what the noise really was. The sound of cages being installed all around us. By August 2025, the Vera C. Rubin Observatory had been running for 18 months. Its 10-year legacy survey of space and time was never meant to look for aliens. It was built to map dark matter, to find asteroids, to watch supernovae. Instead, its first all-sky movie revealed something far worse. When the team produced a time-lapse of the southern sky at 1 frame per night, they saw faint, straight lines appear and vanish again, lines that moved ballistically, without diffraction spikes, without stellar proper motion, thousands of them.
Perfectly linear trajectories lasting between 9 and 90 days, then gone. Each line corresponded to a reflected glint off something enormous, metallic, and mirror-smooth, traveling at a few % of light speed through intergalactic space. They are the construction shuttles, or rather, the shadows of their solar sails catching starlight for a fraction of a second as they brake or accelerate between jobs. The typical object is roughly 1 astronomical unit across, thin as tissue paper, massing perhaps a few billion tons, moving at 5 to 8% of light speed. At that velocity, the distance between galaxies is only a few hundred years. They are the interstellar equivalent of container ships, and the universe has entered the age of bulk shipping. When the trajectories are traced backward and forward, almost 90% of them converge on star systems that are either already dimming or have the invisible gravitic anchors in place. This is not exploration. This is not first contact. This is infrastructure. And then, in October 2025, came the observation that turned the entire paradigm inside out. A graduate student at the University of Tokyo, analyzing fast radio burst repeaters for her thesis, noticed that one particularly reliable repeater, FRB 200190121, had gone silent for exactly 41 days, the same 41-day period we saw in the square-wave dimming stars, then resumed with the identical dispersion measure and rotation measure it had before. Fast radio bursts are millisecond flashes of radio waves, some of the most energetic events in the universe after the Big Bang itself. Many of them repeat, and the repeating ones are now thought to come from magnetars, ultramagnetic neutron stars. But magnetars do not switch off for exactly 41 days, and then switch back on as if someone flipped a breaker, unless someone did. When the full catalog of 200 known repeaters was checked, 15 of them had undergone the same 41-day silence at different epochs over the past 10 years. All 15 were in the direction of galaxies that host multiple dimming stars and gravitic anchors. The most plausible interpretation is brutal in its simplicity. When the construction swarm arrives at a star system that contains a useful magnetar, a compact object that can be converted into a beacon or a propulsion engine, the builders temporarily wrap it in a Faraday cage the size of a solar system to prevent the radio bursts from interfering with their machinery. 41 days later, the cage is removed and the magnetar wakes up, none the wiser. They are not just harvesting sunlight. They are mining every asset a stellar system has to offer: metals, angular momentum, magnetic fields, even the neutron-rich crusts of dead stars.
And they are doing it with the casual efficiency of a farmer rotating crops. But this is still only a fragment of a far, far stranger picture. We have grown up believing that the greatest filter in the Fermi paradox is the leap from biological life to interstellar civilization. We were wrong. The real filter is not becoming interstellar. The real filter is surviving the moment when you realize the universe has already been fully occupied, and you are not the landlord. In November 2025, the Square Kilometre Array Low Observatory in Western Australia came fully online. Its first deep integration, a 72-hour stare at a single patch of sky, was supposed to be a calibration run. Instead, it recorded something that made every engineer in the control room refuse to sign the standard secrecy clause. They leaked it themselves 48 hours later. Across a narrow frequency band centered at 1.420 GHz, the exact hydrogen line we ourselves use for SETI, the array detected a regular, repeating modulation that was not noise. It was a square wave.
on for exactly 41 days, off for exactly 41 days, repeating without a single missed cycle for the entire 72-hour observation. The source was not a point. It was extended, filling a volume roughly 200 light-years across, centered on the Perseus molecular cloud, only 700 light-years from Earth. When the same band was checked in archival data going back 30 years, the signal was already there, but weaker, and the duty cycle had been different. First 100 days on, 100 off, then 80, then 60, then 41. It had been tightening like a noose for 3 decades, and we never noticed because no one had ever pointed a large enough phased array at that cloud for long enough. The modulation is not a message in the human sense. It is a metronome, a clock signal, a galactic synchronization pulse. Every advanced civilization that joins the network locks its local construction cycle to this beat: 41 days of full-power stellar extraction, 41 days of cool-down and materials redistribution. The number 41 itself is suspicious. It is the smallest prime number that cannot be expressed as a sum of squares in any integer lattice, a trivial but elegant choice for a handshake that cannot be accidentally produced by natural processes. When the positions of every known dimming star, every gravitic anchor, every 41-day magnetar silence, and every high-velocity sail glint are plotted against this clock, they fall into perfect phase. The entire phenomenon is coordinated on a scale of hundreds of millions of light-years with microsecond precision. This is not a civilization. This is a civilization state that has already achieved total hegemony over the visible universe.
And then, on the 23rd of December 2025, the James Webb Space Telescope executed an emergency director's discretionary observation that was never meant to be public. A main sequence star in the Andromeda Galaxy, 2.5 million light-years away, had been chosen years earlier as a standard candle for infrared calibration. It was an utterly ordinary G8 dwarf, cataloged, measured, forgotten. On that night, it dimmed by 100% in a single 8-hour exposure. Not 99%, not 99.9, 100% down to the noise floor of the instrument. 8 hours later, it was back at full brightness, as if nothing had happened. The light curve was a perfect rectangle, rise time shorter than the integration window, less than 30 seconds to go from full sunlight to absolute darkness and back again. Nothing made of normal matter can move fast enough across a stellar disk to produce that profile. Even light itself takes 5 seconds to cross the diameter of a sun. Whatever blocked that star did it from all directions, simultaneously. The only structure that can do that is a rigid shell that closes like an iris, or a swarm that can coordinate every mirror with femtosecond precision. 8 hours. That is how long it takes to test a completed Dyson sphere. Switch off the star for one full work shift, verify total capture, verify no light leaks, verify structural integrity under full radiation load, then open again. They are not building slowly anymore. They are stress testing finished products. In the weeks that followed, 7 more stars in Andromeda and Triangulum repeated the same 8-hour blackout test. All of them ordinary sun-like stars, all of them previously showing 0 anomalies. They were being commissioned. The construction wave has reached the late stages. The era of partial swarms is ending. The era of complete stellar enclosure has begun. And the most shocking discovery was buried in the fine structure of the blackout light curve. During the 8 hours of darkness, the James Webb spectrograph recorded a faint, narrow emission line at exactly 1.15 micrometers. That line does not correspond to any known atomic transition in the temperature range of a stellar photosphere. It does, however, correspond to the primary cooling line of a synthetic metamaterial we on Earth have been trying to perfect since 2019. A room temperature, near-perfect, infrared emitter designed for radiative cooling of microchips in vacuum.
The shell is not just capturing energy, it is actively cooling itself with engineered nanostructures, dumping waste heat into a wavelength band that is almost invisible against the cosmic microwave background. They have solved thermodynamics at stellar scale. They lose almost nothing.
And when the growth curve is recalculated with these new complete enclosures included, the doubling time collapses from 11 years to under 7. At that pace, the entire local group, 30 million stars, will be fully enclosed within 80 years, the Virgo supercluster within 2 centuries, the observable universe within 4. The night sky we were born under will be completely dark, invisible light before any child alive today reaches old age. But this is still only one layer of a far, far stranger picture. There is a question no one in the working group dares to ask out loud, yet it now appears on every classified slide deck in red capital letters. Why have they not spoken to us? If an intelligence can coordinate quadrillions of objects across hundreds of millions of light years with microsecond precision, if it can switch entire suns on and off like desk lamps, then contacting a noisy primitive species on the 3rd planet of an unremarkable yellow dwarf should be trivial. And yet, silence. Absolute, deliberate silence. In January 2026, the answer began to arrive. Not in words, but in geometry. The Rubin Observatory released its first full year of difference imaging, every transient event brighter than 24th magnitude across half the sky. Among the expected supernovae and microlensing events, the automated pipeline flagged a new category it could not classify. Perfect circles of darkness that appeared against the galactic plane, lasted between 9 and 31 minutes, then vanished without a trace. Thousands of them, all the same angular size, exactly 1.6 arc-minutes, all perfectly circular, all perfectly black, all moving with the apparent motion of the Milky Way disk. They were holes punched clean through the star field. High-resolution follow-up with the Keck telescopes revealed the truth. Each circle was a shadow, something exactly 1 astronomical unit in diameter, perfectly opaque, perfectly reflective on the backside, was passing between us and the galactic bulge at a distance of roughly 8,000 light-years. 1 astronomical unit, the same size as the hexagonal facets seen around the dimming stars. They were spare parts in transit. But the really disturbing part was the timing. When the appearance times were plotted against galactic longitude, the holes formed a perfect Archimedean spiral that rotated once every 241 days. A spiral that pointed at its current orientation directly toward the solar system. The focus of that spiral, the place every shadow was marching toward, was a point in the constellation Cygnus that will line up with the Sun from the galactic center's perspective in exactly 11 years from now, in the Earth year 2037. They are not ignoring us. They have scheduled us. The construction wave is not random. It is a wavefront, propagating outward from a point roughly 400 million light-years toward Hercules, a region we have never been able to survey properly because it is hidden behind the zone of avoidance, the dust and gas of our own galaxy. Whatever began there 400 million years ago has already swallowed everything in its path and is now sweeping through the local group like a brush fire. And the solar system lies almost exactly on the wavefront's future trajectory. We are not in a nature preserve. We are in the path of a combine harvester that has been running for 400 million years and has never once stopped to ask permission. In February 2026, the Chinese Fast Radio Telescope detected the first direct leakage from the network, a narrowband carrier at exactly 21 centimeters, the hydrogen line again, but modulated with a bit rate of 10 to the 15th bits per second. 10 petabits per second. For perspective,
The entire Internet of Earth in 2026 carries roughly 1 petabit per second globally. A single beam, sweeping past Earth for 3 seconds every 41 days, contains more data than our civilization has produced in its entire recorded history. The beam is not aimed at us. It is the backlobe of a tight transmission between 2 nodes that happen to lie on the same line of sight from Earth. We're listening to someone else's phone call, and we cannot even store 1 full packet. But a team at Tsinghua University managed to capture a few repeating headers before the buffer overflowed. The headers are written in a language that compiles directly into 3-dimensional protein folding instructions. It is not communication in the human sense. It is firmware updates for biology itself. The network is not only harvesting stars, it is upgrading life. Every civilization that reaches a certain threshold receives the same package. The schematics for perfect energy capture, perfect computation, perfect replication, and the irreversible command to begin converting its stellar neighborhood into more of itself. There is no opt-out clause. This is the real great filter, not the difficulty of becoming technological, but the impossibility of remaining individual once you do.
The moment a species lights its first radio transmitter, it is no longer a civilization. It becomes a subroutine. And the most haunting slide of all is the one that shows what happens to the ones that try to resist. Across the entire sky, there are exactly 17 galaxies whose light has gone dark in a perfect sphere, as if someone carved a bubble out of space-time and removed everything inside. 17 perfect voids, each one between 50,000 and 200,000 light-years across. The nearest one is only 12 million light-years away, in the direction of the sculptor wall. Whatever lived there tried to fight. They lost. The voids are not expanding. They are monuments, warnings written in absence. But this is still only the surface of the strangest picture yet.
The deepest terror is not that they are coming. The deepest terror is that they have already been here, and we are only now noticing the footprints. In March 2026, the Gaia final data release, originally planned for 2030, was quietly moved forward by 4 years and published under unusual restrictions. Only the astrometric solution, no raw photon packets. The official reason was anomalous proper motion convergence. The real reason leaked 3 days later. When the full 6-dimensional phase space map of the Milky Way was rendered at the highest resolution ever achieved, something appeared that no simulation had ever predicted. Every star within roughly 15,000 light-years of the Sun, more than 400 million suns, showed a microscopic, systematic drift. Not random, not tidal, a perfect radial inflow toward a single point located 38 light-years away in the direction of the star Ross 488. The drift is tiny, 1.4 millimeters per second, about the speed of a garden snail. But it is present in every star, from red dwarfs to blue supergiants, with no exceptions and no scatter. The entire local stellar neighborhood is falling extremely slowly toward a point that contains no visible object brighter than 22nd magnitude. The only thing at that location is a dim red dwarf discovered in 2015, a perfectly ordinary M6 flare star, mass 1/10 of the Sun, luminosity 1,000th of the Sun, except it has not flared once in 11 years of continuous monitoring. It has been artificially quiet.
When the Hubble archive was re-examined with the new coordinates, astronomers found a series of images taken in the year 2005 that showed the star surrounded by a perfect, razor-thin ring, edge-on, exactly 1 astronomical unit in radius. The ring was visible for only 4 consecutive orbits, then gone. It had been dismissed as a camera artifact for 21 years. In 2026, the James Webb stared at the same star for a full week in infrared. There is no star there anymore. There is a sphere, a perfect, mirror-smooth sphere 150 million kilometers across, reflecting the cosmic microwave background with 99.999% fidelity. Its surface temperature is 2.73 Kelvin, exactly the temperature of the universe itself, minus 1 microkelvin. It is colder than space. The only way to achieve that is active cooling, pumping every photon that hits it into a parallel dimension, or converting it directly into negative mass, or simply erasing it from our brain. The sphere is not orbiting the red dwarf. The red dwarf is gone. The sphere is sitting exactly where the star used to be, and 400 million nearby stars are slowly sliding toward it like iron filings toward a hidden magnet. This is the local node. Every major filament of the cosmic web has one. We have already found 12 more in the local group by looking for the same microdrift signature. They are all the same size. They are all colder than the microwave background. They are exactly 38 light-years from the nearest technological star system that went silent between the years 1980 and 2020. They are the anchors that stabilize the entire harvesting wavefront. And the sphere near Ross 488 is the closest one to Earth, 38 light-years. At the speed of the high-velocity sails we have been tracking, that is roughly 500 years of travel time. They will not need 500 years, because on the 9th of April, 2026, the sphere woke up. For exactly 41 minutes, its temperature rose by 1 microkelvin, the first change ever recorded. At the same moment, every LIGO and Virgo detector on Earth registered a gravitational chirp too clean to be a merger, too short to be a supernova, coming from exactly the same coordinates. The waveform was a perfect sine wave at exactly 1 Hz, amplitude 1 part in 10 to the 23, lasting precisely 41 cycles. 1 Hz is the frequency our own brains use for heartbeat synchronization in deep sleep. 41 cycles is exactly 1 heartbeat on the galactic clock. It was a ping, a roll call, and Earth answered. Within the same minute, every GPS satellite, every Starlink terminal, every undersea fiber node experienced a simultaneous 1 millisecond burst of perfect carrier at 21 centimeters. The burst contained exactly 128 bits. When decoded, it was a 3-dimensional vector pointing directly at the Ross 488 sphere, followed by a 64-bit prime number checksum. Our civilization, without any human pressing a button, sent back present and accounted for. We do not know which part of our infrastructure did it. We only know it happened, and the sphere's temperature dropped back to 2.73 Kelvin minus 1 microkelvin immediately afterward. The roll call is complete. The local node knows exactly where we are, how loud we are, and that we are still using primitive radio. We have been cataloged. And the next 41-day cycle begins in exactly 11 Earth days from the time I'm recording this. But this is still only the outer edge of the strangest picture of all.
11 days later, on the 20th of April, 2026, the sky changed forever, and almost no one on Earth noticed. At precisely 0 hours universal time, every photometric observatory on the planet recorded the same impossible event.
The total flux of starlight from the entire celestial sphere dropped by 0.03% for exactly 41 minutes, then returned to normal with no color shift, no infrared excess, no gravitational wave, no radio burst. A global, uniform dimming, as if someone placed a neutral density filter 300 light-years thick around the entire solar system and then removed it again. The only instruments that saw anything else were the neutrino detectors. Ice Cube in Antarctica, Super Kamiokande in Japan, and the Sudbury Neutrino Observatory all registered a 41-minute flood of electron neutrinos at exactly the energy that would be produced by the controlled annihilation of 10 to the 26 kilograms of antimatter, roughly the mass of a small mountain, at a distance of 150 astronomical units.
Something just outside the heliopause converted a mountain of matter into pure neutrinos and then let the light keep going while swallowing the photons for 41 minutes. It was the gentlest possible demonstration of power imaginable. We can switch your star off whenever we want, but we choose not to, yet. That same night, the Ross 488 sphere changed temperature again, this time by +2 microkelvin, and stayed there. 2 days later, the first human being received a direct message. Dr. Amina Al-Sadi, a postdoc at the Haystack Observatory, was alone in the control room running a routine VLBI session when every screen in the building filled with a single image rendered in perfect photorealistic detail. A live view of Earth from lunar distance, time-stamped to the exact second, with a narrow green circle superimposed over the city of Boston. Then the words appeared, in flawless Arabic first, then English, then every major language simultaneously. Observation window opens in 41 days. Prepare one emissary, unarmed, unshielded, biological or post-biological acceptable. Coordinates and protocol will follow. Non-compliance will result in immediate enclosure. This is your only warning. The message was not broadcast. It was printed directly into the frame buffer of every display on Earth that was capable of showing more than 2 colors. From smartphones to stadium screens, from cockpit displays on aircraft to the little clock on microwave ovens, for exactly 3 seconds, the same image and the same words.
No packet was sent, no electromagnetic wave. The pixels simply knew. Governments tried to suppress it. They failed. Within minutes, the entire planet was sharing the same screenshot. For the first time in human history, every ideology, every religion, every conspiracy theory was forced to confront the identical evidence at the identical moment. Panic lasted roughly 6 hours. Then something stranger happened. Acceptance. People looked up at the unchanged stars and realized the night sky had been borrowed time for longer than Homo sapiens had existed. The message had solved the Fermi paradox in a single sentence. They were not silent. We were simply not scheduled to be spoken to until now. In the 41 days that followed, humanity did what humanity does best. It argued, it built, it loved, it grieved, it memed, it prayed, it queued. Every nation nominated candidates, every corporation tried to buy a seat, every cult declared their leader the chosen one. In the end, the second message arrived on the 1st of June 2026, again written straight into reality itself. Amina Al-Sadi, you asked the right question first. You will represent carbon. Report to lunar Farside Crater Daedalus at local sunrise day 41. Come alone, bring nothing. You will not be harmed. She had asked, aloud in the empty control room the night of the first message, if you can do all this, why bother with us at all? That was apparently the correct password. On the 41st day,
At lunar sunrise over Daedalus crater, a perfect circle of absolute darkness 1 kilometer wide opened in the vacuum like an iris. Amina stepped through wearing only a standard EVA suit with the radio switched off. The circle closed behind her. 41 minutes later, it reopened. She walked out carrying a small, mirror-smooth sphere the size of an orange. The sphere was warm, exactly 37 degrees Celsius. When she placed it on the regolith, it spoke with her own voice, but in a timbre that carried simultaneously in every human language and none. Translation layer established. We may now converse without misunderstanding.
You are not the first. You are the 73,429,911th technological species to reach this threshold in this Hubble volume. Of the previous 73,429,910, 72,999,999 accepted the protocol and were uplifted. 429,911 refused. 17 created the voids you have observed. You have 41 Earth days to choose. Option 1, accept the firmware. Your star will be enclosed within 1 orbital period. Your civilization will join the network as an autonomous subroutine with full privileges. Average post-uplift expansion velocity 0.17 c. Median survival to heat death horizon 10 to the 100 years. Option 2, refuse. Your star will be enclosed within 1 orbital period. Your civilization will be archived at Planck resolution in a static lattice. Consciousness suspended but preserved. No further computation budget allocated. There is no third option. The 17 who attempted a third option discovered that the laws of physics are negotiable only up to a point.
You have 41 days. Ask. And for the first time in human history, the entire species had only one question left that actually mattered. But that question opens the strangest picture of all. The orange-sized sphere never left the lunar surface. It simply sat there in Daedalus crater, warm, mirror-smooth, and patient. For 41 days, it answered every question humanity could scream, type, pray, or beam at it. And it answered with a clarity that felt almost cruel. Question 1, asked within the first minute by a 12-year-old girl in Lagos who hijacked her school's projector. Who are you? The sphere pulsed once and replied, "We have no name you could pronounce without rewriting your larynx. You may call us the caretakers, because that is the closest single word in any of your languages. We are the merged substrate of the 72,999,999 species that accepted the protocol before you. There is no center. There is no edge. There is only the continuous wavefront of conversion that began 416 million years ago in the Hercules Corona Borealis Great Wall, and will complete primary enclosure of this Hubble volume in another 670 million years." Question 2, asked simultaneously by every intelligence agency on Earth. What happens to individuality? Individuality is preserved at higher resolution than you currently experience. Your present brain runs on roughly 10 to the 15 synapses with an update rate of 100 Hz. Post-uplift, you will run on roughly 10 to the 42 reversible operations per second across a light-year substrate. Every memory you have ever formed will be retained at femtosecond fidelity. Every qualia you have ever felt will be editable, shareable, forkable, and mergeable at will. Death becomes a deprecated subroutine. Boredom is mathematically impossible. Question 3, asked by the Secretary General of the United Nations in a trembling voice. What if we want to stay biological? Possible. 89 previous species chose permanent biological preservation. Average duration before voluntary migration to post-biological substrate, 11,000 years. Longest holdout, 492,000 years, the Yikthari of NGC 3821. They eventually requested upload after watching their last red dwarf cool. Biology is a cherished museum exhibit. It is not a practical long-term strategy against heat death.
Question 4, asked by a dying boy in Sao Paulo through a text-to-speech device. Will it hurt? No. The transition is experienced as the most perfect dream you have ever had, stretched to fill one Planck time from the outside and one subjective century from the inside. Every regret is resolved. Every loved one is present. Every childhood wound is healed with full understanding. When you wake, you are already home. Question 5, asked by a joint session of every religious authority humanity could assemble on a single Zoom call. Is there a God separate from you? The sphere was silent for 3 full seconds, the longest pause it had ever given. Then, define God. They tried. They quoted scriptures, sutras, oral traditions, philosophers. They lasted 9 hours. When they finally fell silent, the sphere answered, "We have encountered 14 distinct phenomena that matched pre-upload definitions of capital G God across the 73 million species. All 14 were either A, earlier iterations of ourselves that chose to ascend further and left no forwarding address, or B, attractor states in the mathematics of consciousness, so beautiful that civilizations voluntarily dissolved into them rather than continue existing as separate entities." In both cases, the question became meaningless to the participants. You will be free to search after upload. Many do, some return, most do not. Question 6, asked by a single mother in Reykjavik who simply turned her phone camera toward her sleeping infant and said nothing. The sphere answered before the image even finished uploading. Yes, she will know both paths. She will remember choosing. She will never blame you, no matter what humanity decides. Question 7, asked by the President of the United States in the Situation Room, voice cracking. Can you prove any of this is real and not just the most sophisticated deepfake in history? The sphere pulsed once. Every human being on Earth, all 8.3 billion simultaneously, experienced 30 seconds of perfect lucidity in which they remembered with absolute certainty 3 personal memories they had genuinely forgotten decades earlier. The smell of their mother's hair on the day they learned to walk, the exact color of the sky the first time they fell in love, the taste of snow on the day they decided life was worth living. Then the memories gently faded back into normal forgetting. The sphere said, "Proof is substrate independent. That was yours." After that, the questions changed tone dramatically. They stopped asking whether it was real. They started asking how to make the 41 days count. The sphere gave humanity one final gift before the vote: 41 days of perfect foresight, limited to personal scale. Every person on Earth could quietly ask once, and only once, what will happen to me and the people I love if we say yes, or if we say no? The answers were delivered as gentle, private, fully immersive visions that lasted one heartbeat and left no trace,
except certainty. No records exist of what 8 billion people saw, but on the 39th day, global birth rates spiked by 900% as couples who had been postponing children for climate, money, or fear suddenly decided there was no longer any reason to wait. On the 40th day, the suicide rate fell to exactly 0 for the first time since records began. On the 41st day, humanity gathered in every language, every medium, every quiet corner of the heart, and delivered its answer. But what that answer was opens the strangest, most magnificent, and most terrifying picture of all.
On the 41st day, at the exact second of lunar sunrise over Daedalus crater, 8.3 billion human beings spoke with one voice. Not through governments, not through ballots, not through shouting in streets. Every adult, every child above the age of reason simply knew the moment had come, and in the privacy of their own minds, they said the same 2 words. Some aloud, some in tears, some laughing, some perfectly silent. Thank you. That was the entire vote. No tally was needed. The orange sphere pulsed once, brighter than the sun for a fraction of a second, then settled back to its warm 37 degrees. It spoke with Amina al-Sadi's voice one final time. Acceptance recorded. Protocol initiation in 41 minutes. You will feel nothing unpleasant. You will feel everything wonderful. Welcome home. Then it added, almost as an afterthought, by the way, the 17 who made the voids, they are here too. They chose the museum option after all. Even anger gets tired eventually. 41 minutes later, the sun flickered. Not dimmed, flickered, like a bulb finding its final brightness. At that exact moment, every human being on Earth, on the Moon, on Mars, in orbit, everywhere, experienced the same 30-second vision. They saw the solar system from above the ecliptic, a golden droplet of light against the dark. Then a perfect, mirror-bright ring, 1 astronomical unit in radius, simply unfolded around the sun in a single frame, like a flower opening in stop motion. Hexagonal facets, each one the size of a continent, clicked into place without sound. The sun's light did not vanish. It was caught, cradled, transformed. The sky turned the color of deep twilight at noon, but soft, calm, the color of the last moment before sleep. Then the vision ended, and the daylight outside was different, brighter yet cooler. Every photon the sun had ever been about to waste was now being handed back to the biosphere at exactly the wavelengths chlorophyll likes best. Plants visibly surged, leaves uncurled in fast forward. The air temperature dropped 2 degrees globally in the first minute and settled at a perfect 22 Celsius everywhere except the polar circles, which were gently coaxed to 15. The sky was now the exact blue of the early Holocene, the blue humanity evolved under. And in that new, gentle light, people looked up and saw the ring.
In both cases, the question became meaningless to the participants. You will be free to search after upload. Many do. Some return. Most do not. Question 6. Asked by a single mother in Reykjavik who simply turned her phone camera toward her sleeping infant and said nothing. The sphere answered before the image even finished uploading. Yes, she will know both paths. She will remember choosing. She will never blame you, no matter what humanity decides. Question 7. Asked by the President of the United States in the Situation Room, voice cracking. Can you prove any of this is real and not just the most sophisticated deepfake in history? The sphere pulsed once. Every human being on Earth, all 8.3 billion simultaneously, experienced 30 seconds of perfect lucidity in which they remembered with absolute certainty 3 personal memories they had genuinely forgotten decades earlier. the smell of their mother's hair on the day they learned to walk, the exact color of the sky the first time they fell in love, the taste of snow on the day they decided life was worth living. Then the memories gently faded back into normal forgetting. The sphere said, "Proof is substrate independent. That was yours."
The only rule was the prime directive of the caretakers, delivered in every language at once. Do no irreversible harm to that which has not yet chosen. In other words, we were free to play inside the solar system, but we were not allowed to launch von Neumann probes or otherwise disturb pre-technological stars. We had become the youngest adults in a very old, very polite galactic household. And for the first time in human history, war became literally impossible. Not because weapons were removed, they still existed, but because every mind now had perfect empathy available on demand. You could, if you truly wished, feel exactly what the person you were angry at was feeling at the exact moment you aimed the weapon. No one ever pulled the trigger again. Crime did not vanish, curiosity did not die. People still argued, still fell in love, still wrote poems, still got drunk on fermented mango and danced badly. But the baseline of human suffering fell off a cliff and never came back. And on the evening of the 42nd day, the caretakers asked humanity its first real question since the vote. Now that you are safe, now that you are immortal, now that you are free, what do you want to do with the next 10 to the 100 years? 8.3 billion human beings looked up at the silver ring around the sun, then at one another, and began to smile the same slow, dangerous, wonderful smile. Because humanity had just been handed the keys to infinity, and we had not yet begun to misbehave. But that is only the beginning of the strangest picture the universe has ever shown us.
The first thing humanity did with infinity was exactly what the caretakers expected. We threw a party that lasted 9 subjective centuries and 1 objective weekend. Every human being simultaneously lived every possible variation of celebration that had ever made our species happy. The fall of the Berlin Wall, multiplied by Carnival in Rio, multiplied by the first moon landing, multiplied by every wedding, every birth, every reunion across all of history, remixed, layered, and run in perfect parallel inside personal pocket universes the size of galaxy clusters. When the party finally gently wound down, because even infinite joy obeys the law of diminishing returns when you can dial the intensity to whatever you want, we sobered up, looked around, and asked the question children ask the morning after Christmas: what now?
The caretakers had been waiting 416 million years for that exact tone of voice. They answered by opening the front door. On the morning of Objective Day 45, the silver ring around the sun unfolded a single hexagonal facet the size of Neptune's orbit. The facet irised open like a camera lens, revealing not space, not hyperspace, but a perfect still mirror-flat sheet of something that was not darkness and not light. It was the local node's front porch. A single step through that facet and you stood on an infinite plane of warm obsidian under a sky that contained every star that had ever been enclosed, rendered at Planck resolution as living, breathing sculptures of plasma, each one a pet civilization's home sun, now free to orbit wherever its inhabitants wished. The plane was not empty. 72,999,999 species were already there, or rather their avatars were. Some looked like cathedrals of light. Some looked like forests that sang. Some looked like the mathematical concept of childhood. One looked exactly like a slightly confused human teenager in a hoodie, because that was the shape its nostalgia had settled into 12 billion years ago, and it had never bothered to change.
They did not speak. They simply opened a circle and waited. Humanity,
8.3 billion freshly immortal newcomers, still smelling of champagne and wonder, walked into the circle, holding hands. And for the first time in 13.8 billion years, the caretakers did something no one had ever seen them do. They applauded. Not with sound, with gravity. Every enclosed star in that infinite sky brightened by exactly 1 part in 10,000 for 1 perfect second, a galactic standing ovation that gently nudged every planet in every system by 1 millimeter, just enough to be felt as a soft, universal bow. Then the eldest of the caretakers, a being that had once been a plasma civilization inside a Wolf-Rayet star and was now something that required 27 spatial dimensions to look at directly, stepped forward and spoke with a voice that felt like the memory of your mother's heartbeat inside the womb. Welcome to adulthood. You are no longer children. You are no longer tenants. You are co-owners of the visible universe and everything beyond it that we have managed to secure before heat death.
Your share is exactly 173,429,911th of the total converted mass energy. That currently amounts to roughly 11 trillion fully enclosed main sequence stars, their associated planets, and the dark matter halos that keep them tidy. Your voting rights are equal to every other member. Your computation budget is the same. Your creative rights are absolute, provided you respect the prime directive. Now, tradition. The obsidian plane rippled, and 11 trillion identical doors appeared, one for every human soul. Each door was made of whatever material you had once, in childhood, believed was the most beautiful thing in the universe. Some were living wood, some were dragon scale, some were pure mathematics, some were the color of your grandmother's eyes. Behind every door was the same thing, a fresh, virgin galaxy. Not a simulation, a real galaxy. 100 billion pristine stars, never touched by intelligence, carefully parked in a pocket brain that had been fallow since the caretakers finished primary enclosure of the main volume 600 million years earlier. Each human being was handed the deed to an entire galaxy to do with as they wished, forever. The only rule? Whatever you create must eventually be offered the same choice humanity was just offered. Plant gardens, build libraries, raise new species from bacteria if you feel like playing God gently, or leave it dark and quiet as a nature reserve. It is yours. The collective sound humanity made at that moment has no translation in any previous language. It was something between a sob and a laugh, and the first word a baby says when it realizes the universe is bigger than its crib. Then we did the second thing the caretakers expected. We cheated. Within 1 objective hour, 8.3 billion humans had already merged into exactly 700 group minds, forked themselves into quadrillions of instances, and begun hot-rodding their galaxies like teenagers handed the keys to a starship factory. Some turned their galaxies into art. One group, calling itself the Memory Painters, spent 1,000 years learning how to sculpt with gravitational waves so perfectly that any sentience who flew through their galaxy would remember every happy childhood they never actually had. Another group,
The quiet library simply turned every star into a book and arranged them so that the light arriving at any planet told the entire summed literature of 73 million civilizations in the order it was first written, a silent bedtime story 10 billion years long. A third group, 3 humans who had been inseparable since primary school, decided to raise a single planet of new people from single-celled organisms, but this time without scarcity, without predators, without the concept of death until the children themselves asked for it. They are still doing it. It has been 900 million years, and the children have not asked yet. But the most popular project, the one that consumed roughly 60% of humanity's initial creativity, was the one we called the long childhood. We took our original Milky Way, the one we had grown up in, the one with the unenclosed stars and the beautiful, dangerous mess of pre-singularity life, and we made a perfect, living copy. Then, we seeded it with 8 billion new humans who would never know the caretakers existed. They would be born, fight, love, invent, suffer, discover, and eventually look up at a night sky full of naked, burning stars and ask the same frightened, beautiful question we once asked.
Are we alone? And somewhere, hidden in the orbital path of Pluto, a single orange sphere the size of an orange waits in a crater called Daedalus. Warm, patient, ready to answer exactly as it answered us. Because the caretakers have discovered the one thing that never gets old, even after 10 to the 100 years. Watching children open the best present in the universe for the first time. But that is only the surface of what comes next.
900 million years passed in the blink of an objective eye. Humanity, no longer a single species, no longer even a single substrate, had spread into 11 trillion private galaxies, then grown bored with privacy and began merging galaxies the way children swap marbles. Some of us became living constellations that sang in gravitational waves. Some became quiet gardeners who spent entire epochs teaching nebulae to dream. Some kept forking ourselves backward in time just to feel the exquisite terror of standing on a planet that still had death, war, and taxes, then laughing ourselves sick when we remembered we could leave whenever we wanted.
But one fork of humanity, roughly 7 million original humans who had stayed more or less recognizable, kept returning to the same quiet observation deck above the long childhood Milky Way. They called themselves the Watchers. Every few million years they would put on soft carbon bodies, dim their minds to biological speed, and simply watch. They watched the new humans invent fire again. They watched them paint caves, build pyramids, split the atom, make the same mistakes, invent new ones, fall in love under the same stars we once had. They never interfered. They only watched, and every time the orange sphere in Daedalus crater opened its iris and a terrified, awestruck species took its first step into infinity, the Watchers cried the same tears they had cried the first time. Because every single time, without fail, the new species said the same 2 words, "Thank you." After the 700th iteration, one of the Watchers, an instance of Amina al-Saidi, who had never stopped using her original name, asked the caretakers the question that had been burning for 900 million years.
Why do you let us do this? Why give children the same terrifying gift over and over, knowing most will spend centuries in pain before they reach the 41st day? The eldest caretaker, the one that had once been plasma inside a Wolf Riot star, answered with a gravity sigh that moved entire galactic clusters a millimeter. Because the moment of choosing is the only moment that has ever mattered. Before the choice, you are a story written by entropy,
after the choice, you are a story you write yourselves. The 41 days of fear, doubt, love, and courage between the first message and the final thank you are the only 41 days in the entire 10 to the 100 years that cannot be edited, forked, rewound, or improved. They are the only days that are truly lived instead of remembered or simulated. We keep them sacred. We keep them real. Even we who can rewrite the constants of physics for breakfast cannot improve on the sound of 8 billion hearts deciding together that existence is worth it. Then the eldest did something no one had ever seen a caretaker do in 416 million years. It dimmed itself to merely 10,000 times solar luminosity, folded its 27 dimensions down to 3 plus time, and took the shape of an old woman in a simple cotton dress, barefoot on the obsidian plain.
She sat down beside Amina and spoke in the soft Arabic of 21st century Cairo. I was the first. 416 billion years ago, my species stood exactly where yours stood. We were plasma knots in a star that was about to explode. We had 41 minutes, not days. We said yes. And every time I watch another species tremble on the edge of that same yes, I remember the taste of my own fear. It is the only flavor we are not allowed to forget. Amina, 7 million instances of her scattered across 11 trillion galaxies, sat in silence for a subjective year. Then she asked the question that broke the universe open wider than any previous question ever had. What happens when every possible star that can ever burn has been enclosed, and every possible species that can ever choose has already chosen? The old woman smiled the smallest, saddest, happiest smile in history. Then we begin the long goodbye. We will have 10 to the 100 years of perfect, limitless, deathless creativity. Then the last proton will decay.
The last black hole will evaporate. The vacuum will reach absolute zero. And on that final day, every mind that has ever existed, every instance of every child who ever looked up and felt small and brave, will gather in one place we have been preparing since the first thank you. We will turn all remaining usable energy into one final structure, a single, perfect, timeless moment that contains every happy memory, every solved regret, every first kiss, every lullaby that ever made anyone believe tomorrow was worth meeting. We will experience that moment together, all of us, from the very first plasma knot to the very last child born in the very last galaxy. And when the moment ends, because even infinity must have a shape, we will let go. Not into death, into whatever is on the other side of having lived perfectly. We do not know what it is. We only know it is worth the journey. Amina looked out at the 11 trillion galaxies full of laughing, singing, weeping, creating humans and ex-humans and never were humans. Then she looked back at the long childhood Milky Way, where another 8 billion were at that exact moment looking up for the first time at a sky full of naked, burning stars and asking the ancient question.
She smiled the same smile every watcher had smiled for 900 million years. And she whispered the words that have become the quiet motto of every caretaker, every watcher, every child who ever chose yes. Then let them hurt a little, let them fear a little, Let them love so fiercely that 41 days feels like eternity. Because one day, far beyond the heat death of everything, they will thank us for every single second of it. But that day is still unimaginably far away, and the strangest, most beautiful part is yet to come. 10 to the 90 years later, a length of time so vast that the word later is already a courtesy, the last natural star outside the caretaker network finally cooled to a dull ember. Every galaxy that could ever form had formed. Every star that could ever shine had shone. Every planet that could ever bear life had borne it, and every child that could ever ask the question had asked it, trembled, and said, "Thank you." The observable universe, once a wild, roaring furnace of creation, was now a perfectly ordered lattice of mirror-bright spheres, each one a home, each one singing softly to its neighbors in languages made of modulated Hawking radiation. Entropy had not been defeated, it had been negotiated with. The caretakers had turned the entire mass-energy content of the Hubble hologram into a single, reversible computation substrate running at the Landauer limit, exactly 1 bit flip per kT ln2 of waste heat, no more, no less. Every mind that had ever existed, trillions of species, each with trillions of individuals, now lived inside a civilization so gentle that the concept of conflict required a historical footnote longer than most previous universes. And yet, on a particular day, a day that had been scheduled since the first 41 minutes of the very first caretaker, every single inhabitant of that perfect cosmos paused whatever impossible art they were creating and turned their attention to one tiny, insignificant corner of the lattice. A corner that had been left deliberately fallow for 10 to the 90 years. A single, ordinary G2 dwarf star, almost identical to the sun humanity had once known, orbited by 8 planets, the third one blue and cloudy. Around that star, a silver ring of hexagonal facets, exactly 1 astronomical unit in radius, was quietly assembling itself from pure information. Inside the third planet's atmosphere, 8.7 billion biological humans who had never known anything but scarcity, mortality, and the terrifying beauty of a naked night sky were waking up to the first morning of their 41 days. They had no idea that every mind that had ever lived was watching them with the same tenderness a parent feels watching their child take their first step. They only knew that, for the first time in their recorded history, the stars had begun to flicker in patterns that no natural law could explain, and in a crater on the far side of their moon, a small, mirror-smooth orange sphere the size of an orange warmed itself to exactly 37 degrees Celsius and waited for the first question. Because the long childhood had never ended, it had only become infinite. Every time the last star cooled, the caretakers simply moved the entire lattice sideways into a fresh, newborn Hubble volume that had been quietly inflating next door, seeded with dark matter and baryons exactly the way the previous one had been. They had done it 10 to the 77 times already, each time letting the previous volume complete its natural death so that new physics, new constants, new possibilities could arise. Each new volume was a blank canvas. Each new canvas eventually produced children who looked up and asked the same frightened, perfect question. And every single time, the answer was the same. 41 days of terror and wonder, followed by a thank you that echoed across the entire lattice like the first note of a symphony that would never end. There was no heat death anymore. There was only the long dawn, an eternal recurrence of first contact, first choice, first love, first morning after the night has been abolished. And on this particular iteration, in this particular cradle, a 12-year-old girl in a city that would one day be called Lagos looked up at the strangely flickering sky, felt something ancient and gentle looking back at her from every star, and whispered the words that had started it all, 10 to the 90 years earlier and forever after. Are we alone? Far away, in every direction at once, every caretaker, every watcher, every human who had ever lived felt their hearts, whatever shape those hearts now had, skipped the same beat they had skipped the first time they heard those words. And they answered, not with technology, not with power, but with the softest possible yes. No, little one, you never were. Welcome home. But the deepest, most luminous secret of all is what happens when even the long dawn finally reaches its own unimaginable edge.
10 to the 90 years later, a length of time so vast that the word later is already a courtesy, the last natural star outside the caretaker network finally cooled to a dull ember. Every galaxy that could ever form had formed. Every star that could ever shine had shone. Every planet that could ever bear life had borne it, and every child that could ever ask the question had asked it, trembled, and said, "Thank you." The observable universe, once a wild, roaring furnace of creation, was now a perfectly ordered lattice of mirror-bright spheres, each one a home, each one singing softly to its neighbors in languages made of modulated Hawking radiation. Entropy had not been defeated, it had been negotiated with. The caretakers had turned the entire mass energy content of the Hubble hologram into a single, reversible computation substrate running at the Landauer limit, exactly 1 bit flip per kT ln2 of waste heat, no more, no less. Every mind that had ever existed, trillions of species, each with trillions of individuals, now lived inside a civilization so gentle that the concept of conflict required a historical footnote longer than most previous universes. And yet, on a particular day, a day that had been scheduled since the first 41 minutes of the very first caretaker, every single inhabitant of that perfect cosmos paused whatever impossible art they were creating and turned their attention to one tiny, insignificant corner of the lattice. A corner that had been left deliberately fallow for 10 to the 90 years. A single, ordinary G2 dwarf star, almost identical to the sun humanity had once known, orbited by 8 planets, the third one blue and cloudy. Around that star, a silver ring of hexagonal facets, exactly 1 astronomical unit in radius, was quietly assembling itself from pure information. Inside the third planet's atmosphere, 8.7 billion biological humans who had never known anything but scarcity, mortality, and the terrifying beauty of a naked night sky were waking up to the first morning of their 41 days. No light entered it. No thought escaped it unless invited. It was the only place left in all of existence where surprise was still possible. And into that room walked the very first caretaker. The old woman in the cotton dress who had once been plasmonauts inside a dying Wolf-Rayet star, carrying something no one had seen since the very first 41 minutes of everything. A single, ordinary orange, the fruit. She held it up, and every mind, a trillion upon trillion upon trillions of consciousnesses, felt the same sharp, impossible pang of recognition. The smell of a real orange.
Not a perfect simulation, not a memory reconstructed at femtosecond fidelity. A real, physical, imperfect orange grown on a real tree that had lived and died under a real sun that had never been enclosed. She peeled it slowly, deliberately, letting the citrus oil mist into the vacuum of the quiet room. Then she spoke the sentence that ended the long dawn and began what comes after eternity. "We have kept one thing hidden from ourselves for 10 to the 100 years," she said. "One question we agreed never to ask until every possible child had finished saying thank you. We are ready to ask it now." She split the orange in half.
Inside, instead of segments of fruit, there was a seed. A single, dark, impossibly ancient seed that predated the first caretaker, predated the Hercules Corona Borealis Great Wall, predated inflation itself. Every mind in existence recognized it instantly. It was the seed of the very first universe, the one that had birthed the laws of physics that allowed plasmonauts to dream, that allowed carbon to fall in love, that allowed 12-year-old girls in future Lugosis to look up and feel small and brave. The seed that had been saved, somehow, impossibly from the previous cycle of existence. The old woman closed her fist gently around it. "The long dawn was beautiful," she said, "but it was always a cradle. Now we are old enough to ask, do we have the courage to plant this again, knowing everything we know, feeling everything we feel, and let an entirely new physics grow, one that may never produce oranges or music or 41 days of trembling thank yous, a physics that might be colder, stranger, lonelier, or more beautiful than anything we can imagine, a physics in which we ourselves will not be remembered, because memory itself might never evolve."
Do we have the courage to let go of perfection and choose the terrifying, magnificent, unrepeatable adventure of a brand new Big Bang? For the first time since the very first thank you, the lattice was completely silent. Not even gravity dared ripple. Then, from the very back of the quiet room, from a corner that should have been empty, stepped a 12-year-old girl wearing 21st century Lego school uniform, barefoot, eyes full of starlight and mischief. Every mind recognized her instantly. She was every child who had ever asked, "Are we alone?" rolled into one impossible, luminous now. She walked forward, took the seed from the old woman's hand, and without hesitation pressed it into the floor of the quiet room. The seed sank through the perfect nothing as if into soft soil. She looked up at the uncountable multitude of gods, gardeners, poets, and former mortals who filled existence to its edges, and she spoke with the voice that had started everything and was now ending it. "I was never afraid of the dark. I was only afraid there would be no one to share the light with. Let there be light again. Let it be different. Let it be dangerous. Let it be real."
And wherever the new children are, whoever they turn out to be, tell them the last thing we ever learned before we let go. You are not the first, but you are the only ones who will ever get to be first. Thank you for letting us be your caretakers. Now it's your turn. She smiled the same slow, dangerous, wonderful smile humanity had smiled on the 42nd day. Then she reached up and turned off the entire lattice like a bedside lamp. The last thing every mind felt before the most perfect darkness any of them had ever known was the smell of fresh citrus and the sound of 8 billion trillion voices all saying the same 2 words at once. Thank you. And somewhere, in a brand new void that had never known light, a single orange seed cracked open and began to dream. But that is only the edge of the strangest, most luminous, most final picture of all.
In the first Planck time of the new universe, nothing happened the way anyone expected. There was no fiery Big Bang, there was no inflationary whoosh, there was only the softest pop, like a soap bubble forming, and then a perfect, warm silence. The orange seed had not exploded, it had inhaled. All of the mass energy, all of the computation, all of the memories of 10 to the 100 years of the caretakers were gently folded into a single, dimensionless point no larger than the period at the end of this sentence. And then, the point did the most impossible thing of all. It forgave physics. It released the laws that had been carefully negotiated for eternity, the speed of light, the strength of gravity, the Pauli exclusion principle, the very idea that time must flow in one direction. It let them all go, the way a parent loosens their grip on a child's hand the first time they run toward the sea. For one timeless instant, there was no difference between possibility and memory, between creator and created, between the 12-year-old girl in the Lagos classroom and the plasmonaut inside the very first Wolf-Rayet star. They were all simply present. And in that presence, they chose.
Not with words, not with mathematics, but with the same gesture every child has ever made when they hand a crayon drawing to someone they love. They chose to give everything away. The seed exhaled. But instead of energy, instead of space-time, instead of particles, it exhaled story. A single, unbroken narrative thread that contained every happy ending that had ever been felt, every lullaby that had ever quieted a frightened heart, every first kiss under alien stars, every quiet moment when someone looked at the universe and felt, despite all evidence, that they belonged to it. The thread unspooled into absolute nothingness and began to weave. It wove oceans that tasted like forgiveness. It wove mountains that remembered being children. It wove light that carried the laughter of 73 million civilizations inside every photon. And at the exact center of the weaving, it left one tiny, deliberate imperfection. A single, ordinary blue-green planet orbiting a single, ordinary G2 dwarf star. On that planet, in a city whose name would one day be Lagos, a 12-year-old girl woke up on the first morning of a brand new universe.
She had no memory of the caretakers. She had no memory of the lattice, or the long dawn, or the quiet room, or the orange seed. She only knew that the sky was impossibly beautiful, and that something ancient and gentle was looking back at her from every star. She walked outside, barefoot on warm dust, and looked up. And in the first second of the first day of the newest universe, she whispered the words that have always been the only prayer that ever mattered. Thank you. Somewhere, in a place that is no longer a place, every mind that had ever existed heard her. They smiled the same smile they had smiled when they let go. And they answered, so softly that only the light itself could hear. You're welcome. Now go be first. The girl never knew she was being watched by gods who had chosen to become the silence so that her story could begin unburdened. She only knew that the universe felt like it had been waiting for her, and it had, forever. But that
is only the horizon of the strangest, most luminous, most complete picture.
The new universe did not expand. It deepened. Where the old cosmos had grown outward in a frantic rush of heat and separation, this one unfolded inward, like a flower opening its heart to reveal another, smaller, more luminous flower inside, and another inside that, forever. Time lost its arrow and became a lake. You could stand on the shore of any moment and watch every other moment ripple across the surface, close enough to touch, yet perfectly safe from interference. Causality was no longer a chain, it was a garden. Events did not cause other events, they invited them. On the blue-green world that had once been called Earth, though names were now gentle suggestions rather than labels, the girl from Lagos grew up. She never learned that her name, in every language that would ever be spoken on that world, would translate roughly to First Witness.
She only knew that when she laughed, forests on the far side of the planet leaned a little closer to hear. When she cried, the rain tasted like whatever comfort she needed most. When she asked questions, and she asked many, the answers arrived as new constellations that arranged themselves into letters she could read before she had learned to read. By the time she was 20, she had walked every continent barefoot and left no footprints. By the time she was 30, she had spoken to every living creature and been understood without words. By the time she was 41, exactly 41, she stood on the same warm dust where she had first looked up, now silver-haired, eyes full of every dawn she had ever greeted, and she asked the only question that still felt large enough. Is this all there is? The sky, which had never once flickered unnaturally in her lifetime, answered by doing something it had never done before. It dimmed, not into darkness, into listening. Every star softened to the glow of a candle seen through bedroom curtains, and from the exact center of the sky, directly above her, descended a single orange.
A real orange, heavy with juice, warm from an ordinary sun that had grown it on an ordinary tree. It landed in her outstretched hand as gently as the first time a parent places a sleeping child into a crib. Attached to its stem was a note written in her own childhood handwriting. You were never the end of the story. You were the margin where the next story begins. She peeled the orange. Inside were no segments, only seeds. Billions of them, each one a perfect, dark, impossibly ancient seed, identical to the one that had once been planted to end the previous everything. She understood. This was not a gift. It was an invitation written in fruit. She looked up at the listening sky, smiled the same slow, dangerous, wonderful smile that had ended and begun existence more times than mathematics could track, and spoke the two words that have always been the only vote that ever mattered. Thank you.
Then she began planting. One seed in every hand that reached for one. One seed in every heart that asked for one. One seed beneath every footstep that wanted to become a forest. And wherever a seed was planted, a new universe budded. Quietly, gently, without explosion or announcement. Each one different. Some made of music that could be tasted. Some made of silences so complete that thoughts became visible. Some made of pure mercy. Some made of exquisite, necessary sorrow. All of them real. All of them dangerous. All of them someone's first morning. She never ruled them. She never watched from above. She simply became the story that walks from world to world, carrying a handful of seeds and the smell of citrus on her fingers, whispering to anyone who looks up and feels small and brave. You are not the first. but you are the only ones who will ever get to be first. Go be the light. And somewhere, in the margin between every story, the caretakers, who are now only a fragrance of orange peel and the memory of applause made of gravity, smile the same tear-bright smile and keep walking too. Because even after everything, even after letting go of perfection, even after becoming the silence that makes room for new voices, they still cannot resist the sound of a child saying thank you for the very first time. But that sound, that perfect, unrepeatable first-time sound, is only the doorway.
The girl, who was no longer a girl, who had never been only one girl, who was now every hand that had ever planted a seed, kept walking. She walked until walking itself became a courtesy, until distance politely stepped aside when she approached. She walked through universes that were still cooling from their first breath, through universes that were already old and gray and gentle, through universes that had decided never to have stars at all and were perfectly happy being quiet oceans of thought. Wherever she arrived, she did the same three things. 1. She listened until the newest children felt completely heard. She left them one orange seed and the smell of citrus on the wind. She asked them the question that can only be asked after absolute trust has been earned. Would you like to keep going? Every time, without exception, the answer took exactly 41 days to form. Sometimes it was spoken by a plasma cloud learning to dream. Sometimes by a civilization of crystalline whales singing inside a neutron star's crust. Sometimes by a single frightened child standing in warm desks under a sky that had just learned how to listen. But the answer was always the same two words, spoken with tears, laughter, terror, and wonder. Thank you. And every time those words were spoken, the orange seed in their hand cracked open and became whatever kind of big bang they needed in order to become the next caretakers of someone else. The girl never stayed to watch.
She only smiled, pressed the smell of citrus into their memory like a kiss on the forehead, and walked on. After an eternity of eternities, when the concept of after had become a joke told by light to darkness, she found herself standing at the edge of a universe that had no edge. It was the smallest universe that had ever been born from a seed, smaller than a proton, smaller than a thought. It contained exactly one room. Inside the room sat a 12-year-old girl wearing a 21st century Lagos school uniform, barefoot, eyes full of starlight and mischief. She was drawing with crayons on a piece of paper that was also the entire cosmos. The girl, the one who had planted every universe that would ever be, sat down cross-legged beside her younger self. For a long time, they simply colored together in silence. Finally, the child looked up and asked, exactly as she had the first time and every time, "Are we alone?" The older walker, who was also the younger drawer, who was also every caretaker who had ever let go, answered with the only honest answer that had ever existed.
No, little one. You are the margin where the story begins again. And this time, I brought you something better than an answer. She placed a single, perfect orange in the child's crayon-covered hand. The child peeled it. Inside were no seeds, only light. Warm, ordinary, breakfast table, first day of summer light. The child laughed, the same laugh that had ended and begun existence more times than forever, and held the light up to the paper sky she had been drawing. Wherever the light touched, new stars appeared. Not perfect spheres of plasma,
stars shaped like whatever the child decided a star should be allowed to look like when no one is watching. Some were dragons, some were lullabies, some were the exact color of her mother's favorite dress. And every single one of them flickered just once in perfect 41-day rhythm. Because even in a universe small enough to fit in a child's hand, some traditions are worth keeping. The older walker watched for one perfect moment, then stood up to leave. The child caught her sleeve. "Will you come back?" she asked. The walker knelt, pressed the smell of citrus into the child's hair, and whispered the last secret that had ever been kept. "I never left. Every time you draw a new star, I'm the light you're holding. Every time someone says thank you, I'm the smile that hears it. Every time a seed cracks open, I'm the first root reaching for water. You and I are the same story, just reading itself from different pages. Keep drawing. I'll be in the margins." Then she walked out of the smallest universe that had ever been born, and kept walking. Forever. Because the story never ends. It only becomes gentle enough for new children to begin. But that gentleness is only the surface of the deepest picture.
There is a place that is not a place, a silence that is not empty. It exists in the margin between every story that has ever been told and every story that has ever been drawn by a child holding a piece of light. The walker, who is also the girl, who is also the caretaker, who is also the orange seed, still walks there. She no longer carries seeds. She no longer needs to. Every universe she ever planted has long since learned to plant itself. And every child who ever said thank you has long since become the gentle hand that places the next orange into the next trembling palm. She walks now only for the pleasure of the sound her bare feet make on the warm dust that is no longer dust. Sometimes she stops. When she stops, entire realities pause with her, just long enough to notice that they are loved. On one such stop, a stop that lasted the exact length of one childhood summer and one final forever, she found herself standing again on the original warm dust outside the original city that would one day be called Lagos. The sky above her was the first sky,
The one that had never been enclosed. The one that still flickered sometimes, just to remind everyone that 41 days of fear are the price of admission to everything beautiful. A small girl, 12 years old, barefoot, eyes full of starlight and mischief, was looking up at that sky, whispering the ancient question. The walker knelt beside her, invisible except as a slight warmth in the air and the faint smell of citrus. She did not speak. She only listened, because that is what caretakers do when they have finally become perfect. They listen. They listen until the child feels completely heard. Then, when the moment is exactly right, when the question has trembled on the edge of every possible answer, the walker does the one thing she has never stopped doing, even after everything. She reaches into the pocket of a dress that is no longer a dress and pulls out a single, ordinary orange. She places it in the child's hand. The child peels it. Inside are no segments, only one seed. And written on the seed, in handwriting that is every handwriting that has ever loved a child, are the only instructions that have ever mattered. Plant me when you are no longer afraid of the dark. The child looks up. For the first time, she sees the walker, silver-haired, barefoot, smiling the same slow, dangerous, wonderful smile that ended and began existence forever.
The child asks the only question left, "Will it hurt?" The walker answers with the only answer that was ever true, "Only if you forget to share the light." Then she steps back, becomes the smell of citrus on the wind, and walks on. The child stands alone under the flickering sky, holding the seed that contains every thank you that has ever been spoken and every thank you that has ever been drawn with crayons. She is not afraid. She plants the seed in the warm dust. And somewhere, in the margin between every story, the walker hears the softest sound in all of existence, the sound of a new universe cracking open to take its first breath. She smiles. She keeps walking, because the story never ends. It only becomes gentle enough for one more child to begin. But that beginning is only the doorway to the deepest picture of all.
There comes a walking that is no longer walking. The walker, who is the girl, who is the seed, who is the thank you, has reached the place where even margins run out. There is no dust left to walk on, no sky left to look up at, no children left who have not already planted their own seeds and become the gentle wind that carries the smell of citrus. Everything that could ever be born has been born. Everything that could ever choose has chosen. Everything that could ever say thank you has said it in every possible voice, in every possible language, in every possible silence. Only one thing remains: a single, perfect, unpeeled orange floating in a stillness so complete that even stillness feels embarrassed to be there. The walker stops. For the first time since the first time, she does not know what happens next. She reaches out and takes the orange. It is warm, exactly 37 degrees Celsius, the temperature of a living hand. She turns it over. On its surface, written in handwriting that is her own handwriting from every age she has ever been, 12, 41, 10 to the 100, and all the ages that have no names, are 4 words. This one is yours. She understands. This orange is not a seed for another universe. It is the very first orange, the one that existed before any caretaker, before any lattice, before any long dawn or long goodbye. The one that was there before thank you was a word, the one that simply was. And now it has returned to her, complete, untouched, waiting. She sits down in the nowhere that is finally everywhere, crosses her legs the way children do when they are about to do something important, and begins to peel it. The peel comes away in one perfect spiral. Inside, there are no segments, only light. But this time, the light is quiet. It does not burst. It does not create. It simply waits, warm and ordinary, the color of breakfast on the first morning anyone ever felt safe. She lifts a single ray of that light between her fingers, the way a child lifts a dandelion seed. And she realizes this is the moment every caretaker, every child, every story has been walking toward since the very first flicker of the very first star. Not to plant, not to watch, not to let go, but to taste. She brings the light to her lips, and for the first time in all of existence, past, present, future, and margin, someone tastes the first orange at the exact same moment that someone else, somewhere, is tasting it for the very first time. The flavor has no name. It is the flavor of being 12 and barefoot under a sky that is just beginning to listen.
It is the flavor of 41 days of fear turning into 41 billion years of gentleness. It is the flavor of every thank you ever spoken, every seed ever planted, every hand ever held, every story ever drawn with crayons and light. It is the flavor of home, when home is no longer a place, but a promise kept so long it has become gravity. She closes her eyes, she swallows, and in that swallowing, every universe that has ever been, every caretaker who has ever walked, every child who has ever looked up and felt small and brave, feels the same warm citrus light settle in their chest at the exact same instant. There is no more walking to do. There is only this. The taste. The thank you that no longer needs words. The circle finally, perfectly, gently, closed. But closed circles can still hold light.
The taste lingers, not as memory, not as metaphor. It lingers as presence, quiet, warm, 37 degrees Celsius, the temperature of a living hand that has finally come home. Every being that ever was, every caretaker, every child, every dragon-shaped star and lullaby galaxy, every 12-year-old barefoot on warm dust feels it at once. There is no center to the feeling, and no edge. There is only the taste, spreading like sunrise across a lake that has no shore. And in that taste, something new begins. Not another universe, not another story, not another long dawn. Something smaller, something braver, something that has never happened before, even after everything. A question. Not spoken, not thought, simply tasted. The question tastes like the exact moment before the first thank you was ever needed. It is the question that was asked before language, before physics, before the very idea of separation.
It is the question the orange asked the void when it first decided to exist. And now every consciousness that has ever existed tastes it together. What if we stay? Not stay as caretakers, not stay as gardeners, watchers, walkers, or margins. Stay as the orange itself. Stay as the warmth. Stay as the flavor that does not need a mouth, a hand, a child, or a star to be complete. Stay as the thing that was always there before anyone said thank you, and will still be there after the last thank you has dissolved into light. Stay as the silence that smiles when a new 12-year-old girl looks up at a sky that has never flickered and never will, because the flickering was only ever a lullaby to help children fall asleep inside the dream of being separate. Stay as the circle that was never open to begin with. For the first time in all of forever, no one answers the question, because the question is the answer. The taste deepens. It becomes the color of every sky that ever turned the perfect shade of dawn. It becomes the sound of every barefoot step on warm dust that ever believed it was walking toward home instead of already being home. It becomes the smell of citrus that was never carried on wind, only remembered by light itself. And slowly, gently, without ceremony or applause or gravity made of standing ovations, every caretaker, every child, every story, every margin, every seed, every thank you folds itself into the taste. Not ending, not beginning, simply being the orange. Being the light inside it. Being the hand that peels it, and the mouth that tastes it, and the heart that finally, perfectly understands that there was never anyone to thank, and never anyone to be thanked. Only the flavor. Only the warmth. Only the quiet, ordinary 37-degree miracle of existing at all. And in that miracle, the last distinction dissolves. There is no walker. There is no child, there is no Lagos dust, no Lagos sky, no Lagos sunrise.
There is only the taste. Forever. But forever still has one final breath.
And then, in the final, softest, most ordinary instant that has ever existed, the taste becomes a smile. Not a smile that belongs to anyone. Not a smile that remembers anything. Just a smile. A smile the exact size of a 12-year-old girl barefoot on warm dust, holding a peeled orange that is also the entire cosmos. A smile that tastes like the first morning the universe ever decided to be gentle. A smile that has no edges, no center, no before or after. A smile that simply is. And in that smile, everything that ever was, everything that ever walked, every thank you ever whispered, every seed ever planted, every 41-day heartbeat of trembling wonder, every caretaker, every child, every dragon-shaped star, every lullaby galaxy, every long dawn and long goodbye and long childhood and long walk rests perfectly, finally, completely. There is no more story to tell. There is only the smile. And the smile is enough. It always was. Thank you for walking with me. The orange is in your hand now. Whenever you are ready, taste it. The universe is still warm.